just for a few minutes, let's you and me throw down on the hormones. There'll probably be a few mistakes in here, but I hope you'll learn something. Please consult your book. Do what your teacher wants you to do to succeed. In the brain, there is an area called the hypothalamus, and it is especially important as a homeostatic regulator. It detects issues with hunger, anger, rage, aggression, sex drive, blood pressure, temperature, and the like. And through its powerful effect on the pituitary gland, it regulates many body systems. Thank you to the hypothalamus. Let's take a look at the pituitary gland for just a moment. The front side of the pituitary gland is called the anterior pituitary, also referred to as the adenohypophysis. The back side is called the posterior pituitary, referred to as the neurohypophysis. It embryologically develops from the brain and moves down to meet the tissue from the roof of the mouth to form the pituitary gland. The reason that this is important is that the anterior pituitary is connected to the hypothalamus through the hypophyseal portal system, and the posterior pituitary has hormones that are produced in the hypothalamus and then simply released from the posterior pituitary, as compared to the anterior pituitary, which manufactures hormones and releases them here in response to some of the releasing hormones from the hypothalamus. Let's talk about growth hormone releasing hormone first. It causes GH to be released from the anterior pituitary, and I usually say that it has about 3 effects. Increases bone length, muscle mass, and fatty tissue deposition. Now, the book says that bone and muscle have to do with long-term effects, and the fatty acid mobilization is a short-term effect of growth hormone. Let's look next at some of the sex hormones. Let's look at gonadotropic releasing hormone, which comes from the hypothalamus and stimulates the release of 2 hormones, FSH and also LH, which have a powerful effect on the male and female sex glands. So let's talk about FSH first. If we think about the female, and by the way, these represent the ovaries of the female and these represent the testes of the male. When we look at FSH and its impact on the female ovary, it causes an egg to be ripened, and then the process causes estrogen to be released. Remember that estrogen is responsible for the secondary sex characteristics of the female, including all the lovely curves that make you ladies have the body that you have. FSH on the male, let's talk about what happens in the testes. In the male, it causes sperm to be produced. Next, let's talk about luteinizing hormone, or LH. Let's talk about the effects in the female and the male. When we go down to the ovaries, LH, I say, causes ovulation. Also, progesterone is what progestation for pregnancy, what causes the endometrial lining to proliferate in anticipation of the baby. Also, estrogens are released as well. In the male, LH in the male causes him to release testosterone, and that results in the secondary sex characteristics of the male, including a deeper voice, possible muscle and bone density, greater density, more hair on the body. That's testosterone. The next hormone I would like to track from the anterior pituitary is prolactin. Pro means for, and lactation means milk. And so prolactin is what causes the breast to become engorged with milk in anticipation of the baby. We're going to blend in some posterior pituitary hormones now. Appropriately, oxytocin secreted from the posterior pituitary but produced in the hypothalamus is what causes prolactin to, what causes milk to be let down. So prolactin causes the breast to become engorged with milk, and then oxytocin is what causes milk letdown. It's also a smooth muscle contractor, contracts the uterus and other parts of the male and female reproductive system. Also, interesting hormone associated with a sense of well-being. Another hormone released from the posterior pituitary is antidiuretic hormone. Once again, produced in the hypothalamus, released from the posterior pituitary. Antidiuretic hormone means against diuresis. Diuresis is urinating out too much water. This is a water conserver and thus an increaser in blood pressure. One of the interesting things that I noticed is that you have two major systems, ADH and big aldosterone, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, that have to do with water conservation, but we have one that helps ditch excess water, atrial natriuretic peptide, which diminishes sodium and thus water leaves the body, thus decreasing blood pressure. My thought on this is that historically we have a more difficult time retaining water than the risk of getting too much, and so therefore we have two systems, aldosterone, renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, and ADH to help conserve water, 2 against 1. Next, I would like to talk about thyroid releasing hormone from the hypothalamus that causes TSH to stimulate the thyroid gland to produce T3 and T4, triiodothyronine, tetraiodothyronine. These are metabolic stimulators. Also from the thyroid gland, from the follicular cells produce T3, T4. Parafollicular are calcitonin producers. This helps to diminish blood calcium. When we look at the backside of the thyroid, the parathyroid glands, the chief cells of the parathyroid glands help increase blood calcium. Corticotropic releasing hormone, corticotropin possibly, I may be saying this wrong, from the hypothalamus, which stimulates the anterior pituitary to release ACTH, which then stimulates the adrenal cortex. There are several layers of the adrenal cortex. There's the zona glomerulosa, which produces the mineralocorticoids, zona fasciculata, glucocorticoids, and zona reticularis, sex steroid hormone. Aldosterone is a hormone that helps to conserve sodium in the kidney, thus conserving water and thus increasing blood pressure. Cortisol is released from the adrenal cortex. Its main feature is to increase blood glucose, even though we often take this as an anti-inflammatory. Remember that the androgens from the adrenal cortex are male type sex hormones and probably responsible for some of the female hair patterns that are not located on the top of the head. When we think about the adrenal medulla, the inside of the adrenal gland is called the medullary area, and there are chromaffin cells here that release epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are fight or flight hormones. Remember as well that the heart is an hormonal structure. If there is increased stroke volume of the heart can release atrial natriuretic peptide. Natriuresis is the flushing of sodium from the kidneys. Remember, wherever Mary goes, the lamb is sure to follow. So water passively follows behind, thus decreasing blood pressure and thus stroke volume. The kidney is also an hormonal structure. When the kidney detects low oxygenation levels, it releases erythropoietin, which stimulates red blood cell production in the bones, thus increasing the body's ability to carry oxygen, increased oxygen carrying capacity. Let's talk about a few wild card hormones just for a few minutes. In the brain, there's also a tadpole-shaped gland called the pineal gland that releases melatonin. This one is sensitive to light, and as I tell my students, get off the night shift as soon as you can. It's just not normal to work all night and sleep all day. I think you'll have a better life if you can get off that night shift. The thymus gland is in your chest under your breastbone. This processes immune cells. When the cells are processed through the thymus, they carry a T cell designation, such as a T lymphocyte. If they carry a B cell designation, they were processed through bone. Also, let's not forget that the stomach is an hormonal structure, releases gastrin in response to smelling yummy food, causes increased acid production. Remember that the duodenum produces cholecystokinin to cause gallbladder contraction, relaxation of the hepatopancreatic sphincter. Secretin is stimulated from the duodenum to cause the pancreas to release bicarbonate to neutralize the acidity of the stomach and create an alkalizing environment for protein digestion in the duodenum. Also remember that the gut produces serotonin, so gut health is important for emotional health. There is another thing that I left out that we need to go back and pick up. I'm just noticing that I drew a little thing that looks like a feather in the middle. That is my pancreas. Notice that there is a quill of the feather in the middle. That would represent the exocrine capability of the pancreas, whereas the rest of it, that's the pancreatic duct through which exocrine secretions would go into the duodenum. Most of the pancreas would be exocrine in its ability, but there are little patches called islets of Langerhans in the pancreas that have different types of cells. Alpha cells release glucagon, which helps to mobilize sugars. Beta cells produce insulin, which help to store sugars. And then delta cells produce somatostatin, which regulates other hormones. I did notice in some of my other reading that somatostatin is also released from the anterior pituitary and that it inhibits growth hormone. And then I also realized that there's another hormone called dopamine that actually has an inhibitory effect on prolactin or milk production. That is quite a throwdown to kind of move rather rapidly. I hope it's helpful to you. This is Old Man Barnes, and keep on studying, keep doing the good things you do, one day at a time. Keep up the good work.